It is one thing for Nikki Glaser right there on the stage at the Golden Globes to take a dig at CBS because CBS actually airs the Golden Globes.
And the award for most editing goes to CBS News. Yes. CBS News, America's newest place to see BS News. We needed another.
It's another thing for David Letterman to come out of retirement to take a shot at what's happening in CBS News.
What about those idiots at CBS? The CBS News is a wreck.
Boy, they ruined
it's just gone. CBS News for decades, going back to World War II, before World War II, they would be, Ed Murrow would be broadcasting the Blitz of London from the rooftop of buildings in London for CBS Radio. And it was that mentality that drove the integrity of CBS News that has been trampled on, pissed on, and eviscerated by these idiots that have taken it over.
Yep.
Today, we wanted to have a conversation about Bari Weiss. Bari Weiss sort of taking over as editor-in-chief of CBS News, and all of the consequences that has had, from anything from that unaired so far 60-minute segment to the larger conversations about Tony DeCopel becoming the anchor of the evening news, and how that is going. So Jeremy Barr is here. Jeremy Barr is a reporter at The Guardian, and he's been following the story of Bari Weiss's tenure very closely. And I got a lot out of this conversation. I hope that you do too. Get into it. Jeremy, welcome to the show, friend.
Great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yes, of course. I just want to quickly just kind of set up some of the context going into this conversation. So get everyone sort of caught up to speed. Things have been messy at CBS for a minute. Last summer, CBS abruptly announces they're ending The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. The timing of that is pretty fraught because Paramount, which owns CBS, is in the middle of this gigantic merger. And then fast forward, David Ellison, whose dad has these really deep sort of MAGA ties, becomes the big boss there. Then CBS makes this move. They hire Bari Weiss. She's now editor-in-chief. So I think that's the place we should start, Jeremy. I think we should start there. Weiss officially starts her role in October.
Yeah.
A lot of skepticism, a lot of scrutiny. Who is Bari Weiss?
Right.
Bari Weiss, just kind of briefly here, and why was it so controversial for her to come in?
So I won't go way back. I promised I wouldn't go way back on background, but I just think that we can start by saying that there was a lot of skepticism of CBS News. That CBS, not to go over the whole history, but CBS News settled a lawsuit this past summer with Trump for $16 million over an editing decision that was very commonplace. It was the editing of a 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris, and they settled that case right before our regulatory agency approved a huge merger that they had with another company.
Yeah.
And that kind of created the leadership structure that we have right now. So kind of going into the hiring of Bari Weiss, people were thinking that CBS and the leadership was doing things to appease Trump. They were trying to get on Trump's good side. And so they bring in Bari Weiss, and they did that by buying her company, the Free Press, which she launched a few years ago after quitting the New York Times. So she's 41. She's not a super veteran in the industry, and she was known more for working on opinion pages. She worked at the Wall Street Journal for a few years on the opinion page. She worked at the New York Times, and she really got famous by quitting the New York Times. She famously quit in 2020 in a very long post talking about it being in a liberal place, saying that she was being bullied by her colleagues on Slack. And I think that piece was met with some skepticism by some people, and other people viewed that as a huge revolt, kind of a person from inside the beast is saying this whole thing is rotten and that this is not the right way to do media. And so Bari Weiss is kind of this like young, very confident, brash person, very personable, was brought on by David Ellison, who's the CEO of Paramount Skydance. And given this sort of mandate to kind of like redo CBS News in a way that, we don't know if that's reoriented politically. I mean, I think that the things that Bari Weiss has said that she wants to do are super vague. They're super broad. There are things like, bringing trust back into news and, being a place where people can get information they can use to go about their lives. But it's kind of the things that TV news was already doing. And so she hasn't laid out a super specific strategy about what she wants to do differently. And we've kind of read her goals based on some of the controversies that have happened, which we can get into. But.
Well, so okay, the bringing back trust in the news, that's literally anybody who takes over any news organization is like, hey, the goal here is to bring audiences back, let people sort of trust us a little bit more. She's been there for 3 months. You've been reporting on this. Just kind of briefly, what are people telling you about how that's going?
It's going not so good. I
Okay.
mean, I think that like, these jobs are really hard. And I don't, I'm not trying to engender sympathy for people who are like highly paid TV executives. But I think that, TV news viewership in the US is going down. The average age of a TV viewer in the US, particularly for cable networks, is like 67, 68.
Right.
And that's my parents. My parents are great people. But they can't be the future of the business, for the next 50 years.
Yeah.
And so, I think that people were skeptical of her because she had no experience in TV. And I think TV is a business where people really want to see veterans come in. They want you to have, earned your stripes in television.
Yeah.
And so this person comes in who doesn't have that experience and also is saying these broad things about how we need to do things differently. But some of the principles she's laying out are very similar to what the CBS has been doing for decades.
Yeah.
CBS has this incredible reputation in the United States. It's sort of the gold standard. And I think there are some people who are like, we need to stop talking about Walter Cronkite. That was like, I don't know, a very, very long time ago. We have to move on to the future. But I think that the network is held in a certain kind of esteem because of the history of it, Edward R. Murrow, and sort of just like it's kind of associated with, the dawn of broadcast journalism. And I think that there have been journalists at the network who feel like she's just sort of not cut out for this role and that she's doing things that are sort of not befitting the role.
I think the best example of all of this has been the 60 Minutes story, right? So back in December, 60 Minutes, iconic show, pulls one of their segments at the very last minute. It was a story about Venezuelan men deported from the U.S. to this notorious prison in El Salvador. Bari Weiss said that she shelved that story because she felt they needed to do more reporting and get a response from the Trump administration. Those are things that editors in chief of organizations sometimes say. How did people react to that decision?
Something like really incredible happened in TV news, which is that, that segment was supposed to air on December 21st. They had promoted this segment. They set out like the listing of segments, which they do to send to reporters a few days before the show airs. We were all kind of prepared for that segment. And then they kind of bumped the segment. And then the correspondent, Sharon Alfonsi, who reported the segment, sent out an email to some of her colleagues, basically blasting the decision, calling it a political decision, basically saying the story had been fully vetted by standards and legal, reviewed 5 times, and like really attacking, criticizing Bari Weiss in very intense and critical language. And so that is really the biggest moment of these first 3 months of Bari Weiss's tenure, is to have this super veteran correspondent basically questioning the integrity of her boss. And basically saying that, what Bari Weiss is saying about not having enough comment from Trump administration that's not a good reason, and that they had reached out to the Trump administration. And, as a journalist, Trump administration often doesn't respond to things, they decline comment. And so she was arguing that it's sort of an unfair standard for publication to have, a requirement to have somebody from the Trump administration come on the air. So that kind of like this rung all the different alarm bells at CBS News and in the industry about it. About this is somebody coming on who people are already skeptical of, and then sort of killing a story or kind of delaying a story that is going to be critical to the Trump administration, because I think people rightly assumed, and then we actually ended up seeing the story since it aired in Canada on a streaming service, that it yes, it did interview people who had been imprisoned and talked about sort of bad conditions. And so it's been a huge controversy. CBS just says the story is still going to air at some point. It could air this coming Sunday. We don't know that quite yet. But they want to push back on the idea that it's been killed.
Right.
Bari Weiss has sort of said that it's just being delayed. But still, delaying a story, pulling at the last second, is still super unusual. And it kind of like confirmed everything people were already worrying about. Or not everybody, but some people were worrying about.
There's something to be said about the fact that the entire Bari Weiss philosophy has been sort of around this free speech idea, right? So the newsrooms are not speaking out loudly enough. How does the decision to shelve or delay this segment, how does that sort of rub up against the philosophy that she says that she's been sort of trying to advance?
I have no idea. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. I mean, I think like, we haven't heard her speak, super publicly. She's released memos about it internally. She's explained that she wanted more reporting, and that there's a whole kind of like disagreement about how much time she had to review the segment, and did she have enough time? Scott Pelley, who's one of our sort of the veteran correspondents on 60 Minutes, allegedly said that Weiss, this is not a part-time job. She has to actually come to all the screenings. And the backstory of 60 Minutes is that it's kind of always been very independent from the rest of CBS News. It used to be housed across the street from the building. They like to kind of do things their own way, but their own way, I would say works because it's a wildly watched show. At a time when people are not watching linear television.
Deeply respected,
10 million
right? Very
people.
storied,
Right.
sort of, yeah.
Right. Super serious correspondent. It's sort of the embodiment of television journalism in the U.S. And some people don't like it, but it is wildly watched, very, very well respected. And so I think any incursion into that editorial integrity is a huge deal. And so, yeah, I think that, Bari Weiss's principles are obviously make a lot of sense, the idea of being pro free speech. But I think when you get to television news, there's a lot of complicated elements to it. And, I think that she does have the ability to have oversight over the show to some degree. I think historically, CBS News presidents, she's not a president, she's an editor-in-chief, which is an unusual position and didn't exist previously. CBS executives have always reviewed these segments, but I think what I've been told from people who've been part of the process and people who've worked on the show is that they don't normally, kill segments. They ask a few questions, but they come into it with the intent that it's going to run because the show has, it stands behind it. So, yes, I think people have rightly posed the question of, is this silencing free speech? But I think in this case, we're in a different medium and we're kind of moved on that discussion. Now we're into this like corporate television, super regulated environment. Everything is super carefully edited and legalized and standardized. And we're in a different playing field than kind of the online free speech battles that I think that Bari Weiss was sort of more referring to before.
Now, she sort of talked about like wanting to sort of reinvent news in a bunch of different arenas. And one of the big things that she said she wanted to reinvent is the evening news. And one of the ways of doing that is putting in CBS reporter Tony DeCoppel to sort of anchor that show. How is that going so far, Jeremy?
CBS would say it's going pretty good. I think I think that as a journalist, it's not going very well. And I think that if you went on social media, you'd find a lot more tweets saying it's not going well than it's going well. Tony DeCoppel is somebody who had only started hosting on CBS in 2019. He was the morning show co-host, of relatively new face in the industry. And given this job that one CBS News colleague called it like the kiss of death job.
Oh, no.
Because this job has changed hands so many times, it had a lot of different anchors going back, way back, many, many different anchors have had this job. And it does tend to switch hands every few years. Nora O'Donnell had the job for, I think, 5 or 6 years, which is a pretty long run. But you had a guy named Jeff Glor do it for a few years. You had Scott Pelley do it for a few years. Katie Couric, I'm not sure if you remember that whole experiment where CBS paid a lot of money to Katie Couric. So it's a job that is hard to succeed in. And it's mostly because the ratings in television are very hard to change. And I'm not sure if there's a person you could put onto that show that could dramatically change the ratings of the show. You could pick,
But I mean, that's true. I think in general, that's true. But also, I think can I just play you the clip that's been sort of making the rounds? Because I've been seeing this sort of all week about how Tony DeCoppel is doing. So I just want to play you this clip really quickly.
Other news, as you just heard from Jill. Well, to other news now, to Governor Walz. No, we're going to do Mark Kelly. First day, big problems here. Are we going to Kelly here, or are we going to go to Jonah Kaplan? We're doing Mark Kelly.
Jeremy, I had a hard time watching that. I understand that things don't always necessarily go smoothly when you're sort of trying to onboard a new team, trying to figure out new things. But according to reports, Bari Weiss and her aides were sort of rewriting scripts minutes before air. What have people told you about this? Some of the unusual things that are sort of happening behind the screen there.
There's definitely a power struggle happening on the show right now. What I've heard is that Bari Weiss is very heavily involved. I had heard that she was making suggestions for certain camera angles last week about let's make sure we get a photo of the crowd, getting really involved in it. I think because this is the fate of the show is sort of being closely tied to her tenure, and if the show totally flops, I think people will maybe rightly or unrightly say that suggests that she really wasn't cut out for this job. So, but there is a whole battle behind. I won't sort of bore your listeners and viewers about this, but there's a whole battle behind the scenes between the different producers. I mean, in the middle of the week on Wednesday night, after a show aired in Dallas, they fired the number 2 producer on the show. Basically said that he wasn't on board with the show. So this is day 3 or 4 of the show, and they're already firing a top producer. So there's this tension between the executive producer, this other producer. You have Bari Weiss heavily involved. You have Tony DeCopel heavily involved. He's the anchor of the show, but obviously he answers to his bosses.
Yeah.
So I think that yes, people are definitely looking for mess ups, and Tony has, I guess, provided a few of them. I think he might admit. I mean, I think how these mistakes are made, that whole I think that was teleprompter issue of some sort. But I think, generally speaking, people are watching this show very carefully in a way that people aren't watching other shows, because this is a new show.
That makes sense.
But also because there's a lot of when there's skepticism, people are watching very carefully.
Before we go, it's worth sort of going back to where this conversation started, is that there's chaos in a lot of different places, but CBS is now the punchline in a bunch of different places, right? So CBS is the punchline at the Golden Globes. Letterman coming out of retirement, to go, you know what, I got a few minutes to talk about CBS. Colbert, Jon Stewart, they're weighing on this story, it feels like all the time. Why do you think this story has gone beyond the newsroom and sort of penetrated the culture around us so much?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think that the big story in America right now is Trump and the way that certain institutions have tried to push back on Trump, and kind of it's the fight or flight dynamic.
Yeah.
And you've seen this with colleges, with law firms that have agreed to deals, universities have agreed to deals. I think people care a lot about how media companies respond to the Trump administration. They care a lot about when it seems like companies are just trying to stay on his good side. And when CBS settled that lawsuit with Trump last summer, I think it really, it was going to be very hard to come back from that in terms of the perception of many people. I mean, I worked at the Washington Post, which faced a lot of criticism for a decision to pull an endorsement of Kamala Harris. And it takes a very long time to win back the trust of people after that.
Right.
And so anything that relates to the press and Trump, and it being a bulwark against Trump to some degree, or at least being a check on Trump. I mean, media is not against Trump. The media is supposed to be a bulwark or a check on Trump and on all administrations.
Yeah.
And so I think that this whole thing is about that idea of the press and the role in a free society. And if we kind of lose one of our main networks, I mean, CBS is really intertwined with American television history.
Yeah.
I think that particularly matters to people that CBS is an independent network, which they're claiming they are, and that they're going to hold the Trump administration accountable. But I think they have to prove it. And I think so far they have not proven it, but there's still time, I guess.
Jeremy, I appreciate this. I appreciate the idea there's still time, because then that means we can check on this again, and we can do it another 3 months, see how this is going. But in the meantime, I appreciate your reporting. Thanks again for your time, friend.
Yep, great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yes, of course. Jeremy Barr is a reporter with The Guardian. He was in Washington, D.C. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. We'll be back tomorrow. We'd love to see you then.